Jamar Chase is holding in during Bengals camp. Is that a big deal or is it not? We got James Rapien, who's been firsthand on the scene. We'll talk about that. We got Jordan Love. We got Tua talk. We got Justin Fields and Russell Wilson talk, all here on the Locked On NFL podcast.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's a Wednesday here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Your hosts, Chris Carter and James Rapien of Locked On Steelers and Locked On Bengals, coming at you every Wednesday, giving you updates on what's going on around the league. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday episodes of the Locked On NFL podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. James, I want to cut to you here because we were talking and we were going over topics, and you brought up the Jamar Chase hold in, and I was like, come on, that ain't real. The Bengals going to pay that man. He going to get his money. You know, they ain't breaking up Burrow and Chase. And you said, like, it's not that simple, Chris. There's some complications to the situation for those who are not inside the Bengals camp and have their ear to the ground like you do. What are the things about these negotiations that maybe the public doesn't know as much about?
Well, I don't think anyone knows exactly how these negotiations are going. And first things first, I think we've all been there around a player. Certainly if you cover the team and our listeners, fans of teams, regardless throughout the league, where you're like, oh, well, a deal's going to get done. And you see the hold in for a few days of camp or maybe a week of camp. And maybe they're going through individuals, but it's going late and they're out there, but a deal feels imminent. And I just don't get that feeling right now. Uh-oh. And so that's not a huge deal on the surface, but let's look across the league. Justin Jefferson didn't get a contract extension until after year 4. And so there's precedent for it, for an elite former first round pick that came in and just made an instant impact. And so that's fine. And that's how I felt going into this camp. It's like, yeah, it might get done. It might not, but it's not going to matter. But it might matter to Jamar Chase. And it feels like it does. It feels like this hold-in is real enough to where it's awkward enough now, where Bengals head coach Zach Taylor keeps talking about a plan for Jamar, and they've had good dialogue and communication, and that's it. And we just haven't seen him on the practice field participating. Now, he's been out there. He reported the camp on time, all of those things. So it's why it's a hold in. But the win on a Jamar Chase deal is quite interesting. And is he willing to play if he doesn't get an extension this offseason? Justin Jefferson did it, got injured last year, still got his money. I wonder if Jamar Chase is willing to do the same.
That's a big question. And it's interesting to me that there's those kind of vibes because, like, yeah, I've been covering the Steelers for some years now, and I've seen a number of hold-ins. TJ Watt held in, Minka Fitzpatrick held in, Deontay Johnson held in, Alex Highsmith held in. It was weird. We were thinking like, oh, okay, there's going to be another hold-in this year when no one held in. We were like, that's kind of weird. Like, there's no player who's just going to be practicing off to the side on their own. It's become almost like a formality to assume it's going to happen. And I think it's becoming more regular across the NFL. But for Jamar Chase, and I mean, again, it's one thing when it's D Higgins, right? Or T Higgins, excuse me. It's one thing when it's T Higgins, when it's like, hey, buddy, the other guy across the formation is the number one guy. It's going to be tough. And I can see when that happens. But this is the number one receiver. And, you know, you and I have talked about, you know, the struggle of when you're paying number one wide receiver, you better be sure they're the number one wide receiver. Like they got to be top 5, top 10 in that category. When you overpay somebody that's more like a top 20 receiver, that's holding you back. There's no question about Jamar Chase. He's top 5. He's right in that conversation with Justin Jefferson and everybody else at CeeDee Lamb. And so for me, it seems wild that this hasn't been rounded around. What do you think is the big complication? Is it guaranteed money? Is it how long the contract is? What do you think is the biggest holdup here? And I know you're not in the meeting rooms with the front office, but is there any sense of where this is coming from?
Yeah, I think there's two things that could potentially be holding it up. And the first one, you mentioned the guaranteed money. And I think it coincides. It's guaranteed money plus years. because you have this Justin Jefferson deal that sets the precedent, right? Justin Jefferson, 4 years, $35 million per year, ton of guaranteed money. And I'm sure Jamar Chase says, all right, market set. I want my version of the Justin Jefferson deal. The problem is he's under contract for 2 more years.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably wants a 3-year extension, which would be 5 years total. And then he gets another bite of the apple before turning 30, scheduled to become a free agent again at the end of this decade. And it would put him in position to get a third contract that would be pretty sizable. Who knows what the contracts will be then, right? And it would also be 5 years like Justin Jefferson. The problem is if you're the Bengals, you're looking at that and saying, oh, well, why not do 4 years like Justin Jefferson? If we're going to give coin. And so now that would make Jamar under contract for 6 years. And so guaranteed money, certainly probably a topic. The Bengals don't historically give out guaranteed money in year 2 outside of Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's the one guy on that roster that obviously has a ton of guaranteed money on his deal. I assume they'll bend there, but I do wonder, they don't have to get a deal done this offseason with Jamar, at least on paper, because they picked up his 5th-year option. He's under contract for the next 2 years. So who blinks first? Will Jamar play on his current deal? That's probably the most likely scenario if something doesn't get done. I don't know if he's necessarily going to sit out, but it's worth watching until we see him on the practice field, until we hear from Jamar. That's another thing. We haven't heard from him this camp. That's been by design. Until we know what's going on in his mind, we can only speculate and kind of guess. And those are my guesses as to why a deal could potentially get pushed in the next offseason. Number of years, Jamar probably wants 3, Bengals probably want 4, and then, of course, guaranteed money.
That's the other thing that's usually thrown out of the conversations when we're talking about what does a player want. Like you said, it's about when he can negotiate this next contract. This will be his first real contract that he's negotiated for. Of course, he signed his rookie deal. Everyone's that's kind of like the standard thing. But after that is when you get it, and he's not on the market just yet, so he knows that if he's probably still going to be one of the top 5 receivers in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, and he's gonna if he's in his late 20s, if he's still 28, 29 years old, right before he's hitting 30, that's when he's probably gonna make the biggest money of his career. So getting to that a little bit sooner, I think that makes a ton of sense. But I also get why the Bengals are like, no, we don't want that to happen sooner. We want that to be a little bit longer, because again, the team will have longer control over him. So if it's about the length of control to stop him from having a chance to get to the market, I get why the Bengals are sitting and waiting. Where do you see this falling, James? Do you think that Chase gets what he wants in more of a 3-year deal that could be shorter, or do you think that eventually the team kind of wins out and he sticks around with them for longer? Because he is a franchise player.
Mm-hmm. He is. And the Bengals know that. That's the other element here.
Right.
Mike Brown didn't pull any punches. I asked him last week, and the Bengals owner said, oh, we're going to bend over backwards to get a deal done. He said, we know it's Joe Burrow and then Jamar Chase, that he's our number 2 guy. And I've never heard Mike, even when they were negotiating with Joe Burrow last year, he didn't say that. He was much more tight to the vest, said that he's going to keep it in-house when it comes to negotiations with Joe and his agent. Obviously, they got a deal done. This one is quite interesting. So what happens? I do think a deal will get done. The question is when, because no one doubts Jamar Chase's value. I think he wants to be in Cincinnati. I think the Bengals want him. And usually when the situation's like that, something gets done. But does it get uglier before it gets done? That's my question. How far is Jamar willing to take it? We'll see. The Bengals usually don't blink in these situations, but that certainly is an interesting situation to follow. 2 guys that did get paid, Chris. Well, one's in the AFC, Tua Tagovailoa. The other, Jordan Love. We will discuss their deals and buy stock or not buy stock in those 2 guys coming up next.
But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you can download right to your phone today to buy tickets to all your favorite events without it being stressful. You can also go to the website gametime.co, where Game Time makes it so that you can book tickets to all your favorite sporting events, including baseball, because it's baseball season, so it's time to go out and see your favorite ball club play before football season comes back around. Whether you're in Pittsburgh and you want to see rookie phenom Paul Skeens pitch on the mound for the Pirates, or you're in Los Angeles and you want to watch Shohei Ohtani be a world sensation for the Dodgers, Game Time has got you covered wherever you go. Game Time is the fast and easy way to get tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They give you killer deals on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat. You can save up to 60% off tickets, offers tickets, buying tickets at the last minute for sports, concerts, and so many other events. And the best price guarantee means that if you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Let's keep things rolling on a Wednesday edition of Locked On NFL. And Jordan Love, well, he got his money, but not before Tua Tagovailoa, who we've talked about on this podcast.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was able to get his massive extension. I mean, both of these guys, Tua, 4 years, $212 million, $167.1 million guaranteed. It is the largest average annual value, so at per year salary of a 4-year contract in NFL history. Wow. Just for Jordan Love to get $55 million per $220 million, and 4 years, 220, by the way. So he broke that Tua record really quick when it came to that. All right, Chris, let's buy stock. Who would you buy stock in, given their situation, given their weapons, given their coaching staff? Jordan Love or Tua Tagovailoa, given now that they're among the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL?
So it's interesting. I would take the weapons and situation around Tua, but I would take Jordan Love, I think, over Tua, because I think we've seen more of Tua, and I at least have a sense of who he's supposed to be. Like, I don't know, I get kind of the situation that Jordan Love found himself in and how it really worked out for him, because Jordan Love is a guy who sat behind Aaron Rodgers for years, for the franchise that has just been able to land back-to-back franchise guys, which you don't just see everywhere in the NFL, just naturally drafting those guys. But, you know, and now you got a guy that could be the third franchise guy coming up right behind them. You know, this was his first year that he even got multiple starts in the NFL. He comes out, those 4,100 yards, 32 touchdowns, only 11 interceptions. You know, you go 9-8 with him. I can see into why Jordan Love, you know, he's 25 years old. It's time for him to get his new deal. So get out in front of this. That makes that makes sense to me. Tua Tagovailoa, less so. And I get that there's a lot of people that really believe in Tua out in Miami. Don't come for us to Tua non, folks. We don't mean any harm here. But in all seriousness, you look at Tua and he hasn't done it yet. He hasn't shown me that he's the guy yet. And he's had 4 years of having multiple starts. We saw he started 9 games as a rookie, 12 games in 2021, 13 games in 2022. This was the first time he played all 17 games in a season. And he looked good. He had 4,600 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. But $53 million a year, good. That's where I fall short on this. And I think back to James, a quarterback that we both got to watch a lot of in the AFC North, and the timing of his deal really working out for him, but then hamstringing his organization. I'm thinking of Joe Flacco. And I'm not saying that either of these guys are Joe Flacco, but I am saying that, like, Joe Flacco got his big contract right after they won that Super Bowl against the Niners, where he had the perfect playoff run and everything worked out, but the Ravens paid for it. and they paid him what was, I think, the biggest quarterback deal at the time, a lot of guaranteed money, a lot of money, and it stopped them from being able to reload. They basically lost that crew, and John Harbaugh was almost done in Baltimore were it not for Lamar Jackson coming in and saving his tenure there in 2018. And I just look at these situations, and I think Jordan Love has the potential ceiling to get to the Burrow, the Allens, the Jacksons, the Mahomes levels. I think he can get up in that conversation. I'm not sure that Tua can. And I think Love is an unknown, and Tua's you kind of know that you're going to need to put a lot more around him, and this deal could make it harder to do so. Where do you stand on where these guys are as far as making them such high-pay quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think both are risks. I wouldn't have felt as good about these deals regardless as I would have felt about a Joe Burrow who is coming off of an injury, or a Justin Herbert or Josh Allen, because they're not in that category yet. And I say yet because I agree with you. Tua is never going to be in that category. Now, does that not mean he isn't the perfect fit in Miami for what they want to do offensively, distributing it to their speed weapons and in that offense that it really does work. There's no doubt. And 4,600 yards later after last season, Tua can be really darn good for Miami for a long time. And they haven't had a quarterback like Tua that has brought stability for a long time. So I'm not going to knock the Dolphins. Initially, I was like, holy overpay. But then you say it out loud and you realize the fit and what's around him. And even if Tyreek Hill doesn't stay there long term, let's say they trade Tyreek next offseason, which I do think is something worth monitoring. That doesn't mean you can't get other weapons for him. Tua works in that offense. I get it. I understand it. At the same time, I would buy stock in Jordan Love because I do think there's some untapped potential. I do think we saw a ceiling for him that rose enough to where we're like, or a potential ceiling at least last year, where his play rose to a level where we're like, oh, is there another level? Is there another 2 levels, 3 levels to what Jordan Love can do? Because if so, you're talking about now the third straight quarterback for the Green Bay Packers that is not only a franchise quarterback, but a star quarterback. And there is a difference. And I think Tua is a franchise quarterback. I think he's bringing stability to Miami. I don't think, unless he just has a way better roster, he's going to be able to go head-to-head with a lot of these star quarterbacks in big games, in playoff moments, and win. Now, if his roster is just that much better, can you do that? Can you win a Super Bowl with Tua? I'm sure you can. It's just hard to get there when it comes to roster or roster building around that salary. That said, I think Jordan Love has a higher ceiling. And I think is it crazy to think? Let me think about the NFC.
Mm-hmm.
Could Jordan Love be the best quarterback in the NFC in a year? A year from now? Who am I missing?
I mean, Jalen Hurts, if he takes a step forward,
Yeah, so it maybe hurts now, but let's just say Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are just okay again. And Love leads the Packers to 12 wins and a division title. We could see that. We could see a world where that's the case. There really isn't a world, and part of it is the AFC is loaded, but there's not a world where Tua is the best quarterback.
No, there's not.
In the AFC.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm right with you here. And you and I were kind of talking about this in the as we were preparing for the show about what I call the quarterback bubble. And I just wonder, I mean, we keep seeing just the prices on quarterbacks rise and rise and rise and rise. And I get it. Franchise quarterbacks, they go for that money. They're that important. But at some point, Joe Burrows and Lamar Jacksons and Justin Herbert, I get them getting these contracts. But when Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence and Jared Goff and Deshaun Watson, when they're getting these contracts and it doesn't yield you the success for franchise-wise, unless, who knows, if the Jaguars, Dolphins, Lions, and the Browns, if they all win Super Bowls the next 4 years, maybe that shuts me up. But let's say we go through this next 5-year era or the era where these quarterbacks are getting paid these contracts and nothing comes from it. Does the league ever look back at this and say, you know what? It makes sense to pay the elite guys the elite money. but overpaying for good or even very good, that's just not elite, is not benefiting the team unless you just have the guns all around and you're just saying, hey, we're making a run like the Rams did with Matt Stafford. That's a different situation where they had Aaron Donald. They loaded up. They said, we're taking 1 or 2 shots at this and that, and that's what we know what it is. But if you're a team like the Dolphins where you're trying to build for long-term stability, but now this contract with this quarterback that isn't in that elite category, I just wonder if that leads to the bubble bursting and eventually those type of quarterbacks not getting these type of money deals. Do you see that in the future, James? Or are we just in for the long ride of if you're just a slightly upper tier quarterback, you gonna get paid?
It's going to take a franchise that has a GM that is really secure and that is comfortable. And we kind of saw it with Howie Roseman a little bit when it came to Carson Wentz and it came to Jalen Hurts, drafting Jalen when he did. But could you imagine if the Dolphins, like it's one thing if the Falcons draft a quarterback like Michael Penix Jr. when you have an older quarterback like Kirk Cousins on your roster. Can you imagine if the Dolphins would have traded up and drafted, Jaden Daniels, which how much fun in that offense would it have been? But that's what it takes is a GM, a coach to be all in on whatever prospect and to go that route and being willing to move on from a quarterback that has been at that level. And it's really hard to do because you have to be secure and not fear for your job at all. And that's a really tough place to be in the NFL. Not many general managers or coaches have it.
If you look at the Dolphins 2026 roster on overthecap.com and how the salary cap breaks down, Tua Tagovailoa that year is a $68.4 million cap hit with $40.2 million guaranteed. By the way, Tyreek Hill's still on the roster at that time. He's a $56.3 million cap hit. Granted, only $11.3 million of that is guaranteed, so I could see that being shaved down a bit. But they have only 39 players signed to that roster that are on the team that long, and they're still $14.5 million in the red. Now, maybe some of that gets helped by when they add an 18th game, and that boosts everyone's salary cap in 2 years. But I look at that, James, and I just think like, man, like if I'm the Dolphins, I do got to strike down. I got to make it happen soon, or eventually this roster that I've assembled is not going to be able to hold up and be a Super Bowl contender in a couple years. Again, that's why I'm just not so sure about this contract situation.
Yeah, I totally get it. I think it could happen at some point. Speaking of quarterbacks, could there be a quarterback competition in Pittsburgh? We will get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. And all summer long, FanDuel is making sure they keep you in the game because they're hooking up all customers. Whether you've been with FanDuel for 2 years or you're signing up today at FanDuel.com, they're hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And let's say you want to get in on some Olympic basketball action. And right now, the U.S. is 29.5-point favorites over South Sudan in Wednesday's game. Yeah, especially after the way the first matchup went. I think I was going to say the home team, America's team, is going to roll. And so maybe you want to go with that, or maybe you're looking at some Major League Baseball lines, or you're looking at some NFL futures lines. Well, you can get all of those in one spot at FanDuel.com. So don't delay. Check out FanDuel and take advantage of their boost or bonus daily by going to FanDuel.com and making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
We're back here, James, here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, James Rapien. James, I take you all the way over to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, in St. Vincent College, where the Steelers have been in training camp since 1969, where the Steelers supposedly have a quarterback controversy because for the first week of practice, and I've been out there sweating my butt off in the heat, putting on SPF 50, feel like I need SPF 100.
SPF 50.
Yeah, man, I need it, man. I'm too light-skinned to get burned. If Q was here, he would say that's my light-skinned brother over there. But I'm putting on the sunscreen. I'm watching the Steelers practice. And for the entire first week, Justin Fields ran first team for the Steelers. He was throwing deep balls. He threw some touchdowns. He's been very Justin Fields. He's had some up and down moments. He'll hit a 50-yard bomb one moment that's perfectly placed between two defenders and then miss a 5-yard slant the next play. He's been very Justin Fields. But everyone's been asking, is this a quarterback controversy? Is this Justin Fields time in Pittsburgh? And James, I just got to say, it is not. And I say this as a person who's tapped in, who is friends with those who are also tapped in. My colleague at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I work, Jerry Dulac, who's been dialed in on the Steelers for decades. He reported, I think it was Saturday or Sunday, that team sources have indicated that Justin Fields will practice Russell Wilson will practice today. We do know that Russell Wilson was hurt during the conditioning part. It was a minor calf injury that he did while he was pushing a sled, and he was doing some sort of drill that they were trying out that was new this year. And the Steelers are kind of like, hey, we're going to let him rest. I don't think this is a big thing at all. But James, from the outside perspective, I know there's a lot of people that are wondering if Justin Fields is the franchise quarterback because he's younger and he has more time to develop. If you're looking from the outside in, is this so easy to you, or do you think that this should be more of a controversy between Wilson and Fields?
It depends on what they're looking for offensively. I think Wilson can certainly run the offense and be on time and on script. He's still capable of doing those things. He doesn't have the dynamic playmaking ability that he used to have, based on what I've seen in recent years. And Justin Fields can still do that. You mentioned the deep ball. We obviously know what he is as an athlete. And so is Fields a good enough athlete, deep ball thrower, big player, playmaker to deal with all the low points? Or do you want the steady, consistent guy that's going to keep you afloat? In Pittsburgh, a team that's led by Mike Tomlin, Mr. at least 9-8, always winning record, is probably going to go with the guy that brings stability. And so I get that early on, but I do wonder if Wilson doesn't do that and doesn't bring stability and has ebbs and flows and ups and downs, if Fields could push, or is there a chance, regardless of what Fields does? Let's say he suddenly wakes up today and is consistent for the rest of camp, crushes preseason. Can he push Russell Wilson, or do you think he's firmly in that 2 spot?
I think he's firmly in the 2 spot.
Okay.
I think
no competition, nothing to see here.
Yeah, this is a pole. Mike Tomlin phrased it as pole position to start the training camp. But as a person who's covered the Steelers, they said the same thing about Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. Mitch Trubisky, held on to the position. Now, granted, by week 4, because he was so bad, Kenny Pickett eventually got his chance. But
sure,
it's kind of been how they've gone for years. And it's also important. It's only been like 3 years that we've gotten a chance to really see this with I guess 2 years even, because it was the Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky competition, and then last year wasn't a competition because they presumed Kenny Pickett was the starter. But so I guess we've only even seen really 1 year of this, and this is the second year. But Ben Roethlisberger has been or was the franchise quarterback for most of Mike Tomlin's tenure. So there was never a question of franchise QB. So this is all still kind of figuring things out. But at least in what we saw last time, I think it's very much this is Russell Wilson's job until he is either too hurt to play, is very bad, or Justin Fields is like all-time elite. And listen, Justin Fields has potential. I think everyone in Pittsburgh sees it. But there's also an acknowledgement that he needs to become a much more consistent guy before he is the full paid franchise guy that you fully invest in. And it was what you said to start off your comments there: on time and in rhythm with the offense. That's what they need a quarterback to be. And that's what I think Russell Wilson can be for the Steelers offense. This isn't an offense that's looking to throw for 5,000 yards. This isn't an offense that's looking to set records through the air. This is an offense that's looking to run the ball, call play action, play off of this offensive line that they've continually invested in, and they're looking to see benefits off of soon, that they have a really good 1-2 running back punch of Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, and then use that to play into George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, those guys getting targets. And this team's still winning with its defense, just with more offensive production than finishing 28th in scoring for like the 5th straight year.
I have Pickens in a dynasty league. I'm keeping him. It's my final year with George Pickens. Is he going to ball out?
I think he's going to ball out because the Steelers don't have a bona fide number 2 wide receiver, they're going to find ways to get him the ball. But the person who I think really is the sneaky play, if you're doing dynasty leagues or fantasy or anything, James, is Pat Freiermuth, because at least in training camp, they are moving him everywhere in these formations. The Steelers, they're having a battle for the number 2 wide receiver. It's either Calvin Austin, who's the speedy guy that they've had for 3 years now, or Roman Wilson, the receiver out of Michigan they just drafted in the 3rd round, or maybe a guy that they trade for or sign in free agency. A lot of us think that there is a trade coming at some point for that number 2 wide receiver. But the number 2 guy that I think is going to get the targets in this offense right now is Pat Freiermuth. Just knowing Arthur Smith and how he likes to use tight ends. In fact, it was like the first day of practice, and I saw just target upon target upon target go to Pat Freiermuth. And I went up to him and I was like, Pat, so I know that we talked to you during OTAs and minicamp, and you said you've been hearing that this was going to be a more tight end forward offense. Was it refreshing to kind of see that in day one? He was like, oh yeah, it was refreshing. Like he was relieved just in the first day to just be like, I'm finally getting my looks, man. Because Pat Freiermuth has been that guy in Pittsburgh that everyone knows he's not Travis Kelce, but they know that he has the potential to be a serious receiving threat. And he hasn't had that opportunity with old man Ben Roethlisberger, Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, and Mason Rudolph to be that. And so if Russell Wilson can simply just get him some opportunities to make some plays, get 800 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's all he's looking for as, again, the number 2 option in this offense. That's why I think it's Wilson. Fields, I think, is the guy where they got this quarterback coach, Tom Arthur. They want him to revamp, like, hey, shorten your throwing motion, because I was talking with Matt Williamson of Williamson and Peacock, who's with the Steelers and Steeler Nation radio, and he sees everything from training camp. And the biggest thing he said is he has to shorten his throwing motion. It has to be quicker from start to finish to lessen the amount of muscle memory he needs so that it's more accurate throwing. He's more consistent with it, but also just quicker in releasing the ball. And it's those type of things that I think Justin Fields needs to work at, whereas Russell Wilson don't need to work on his throwing motion or on how he reads defenses. He just needs to know how this offense is supposed to work. He'll be a plug and play guy, and I think the Steelers offense would be in a better position than they've been since maybe 2020, maybe 2018 at quarterback, and that's saying something.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Pat Freiermuth, adding him to my fantasy targets list, holding my George Pickens stock. Hopefully you're buying Locked On NFL stock. Please follow wherever you get your podcast, subscribe on YouTube. And for Chris Carter, I'm James Rapien. As always, thank you so much for listening and watching, by the way. Locked On NFL.